You're listening to Nurturing Parents, the official podcast of the Radically Inclusive Parenting Project. Here, we hold space for real conversations at the intersections of parenting, spirituality, and justice. With each episode, we bring together experts, everyday parents, and advocates to explore how we can raise the next generation with purpose, intention, and love. So whether you're tuning in from a quiet moment of rest or in the middle of the beautiful chaos of family life, take a deep breath and let's journey together. Hello and welcome to another episode of Nurturing Parents. My name is Nettie, your host, and I'm honored to have Teresa Kim Pesanovsky here with us today. Teresa was born in South Korea, raised in Iowa, and earned a Master's of Education from the University of Houston and a Master of Divinity from Vanderbilt Divinity School. Reverend Teresa is an ordained minister through the Christian Church Disciples of Christ and currently serves as a chaplain for older adults. In her spare time, she can be found eating noodles, reading middle grade novels, or working on one of her many unfinished art projects. Thank you so much, Teresa, for being here today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here, Nettie.
I'm excited for this opportunity to talk more about your work, which wasn't mentioned in the introduction, but you've authored a couple books that I actually have in my own home. One of them is titled Mother God, and the other is a recently published book that you co-authored called Sparking Peace. And this is the book that I'd love us to dive into and talk more about together today. This book is a beautiful invitation for parents and caregivers of children to have an opportunity to process and reflect together on the impact of gun violence in our society. This is a timely resource for us. So I'm very thankful that you brought this work to families, to even church communities. And to help us get started, would you be willing to share what inspired you to write Sparking Peace?
There was an open call at Menno Media a couple years ago as they were looking at celebrating the 500th anniversary of Anabaptism. And they wanted to restart their children's book line. And I was thinking about different ideas for celebrating Anabaptism and the ideas behind peacemaking and justice. And one of the ideas I had became the idea that turned into Sparking Peace. And I was familiar with the nonprofit organization Raw Tools, and that is an organization that directly inspired the work that is behind Sparking Peace. And Raw Tools is an organization that takes guns and literally turns them into garden tools and other art pieces, and is inspired by the passages. They shall turn their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. And there will be nations shall no longer study war, and everyone shall be at peace with one another.
I'm so thankful that you found a community that's already embodying this prophetic message in the scriptures to transform what was used for harm into something that can promote life and serve life. It's a beautiful story that you co-authored with Hannah Rose Martin. Is there a particular part of the story that really resonates with you, that really touches something deep in your own heart?
That's a great question. Hannah and I were very intentional throughout the whole book. So you will notice that we don't even use the word gun in the whole story. And that was intentional. We wanted it to be an open invitation. So, in and of itself, it's a story of friendship between a child and the child's neighbor. And so you can go as deep as the child you're reading with it is able to go. So, depending on the child's age and development, you can talk about the symbolism and the idea about gun violence behind it and transforming guns into garden tools. Or if the child is really young or it's just not developmentally appropriate, you can talk about, oh, the child and the neighbor become friends in the end. I love the idea that becoming friends and building bridges with someone who is a neighbor who isn't like you can be a step to peace building. There is this beautiful quote by a psychologist named Tara Brach, where she says that trauma is severed belonging. I love that quote because so much of our trauma both individually and collectively, is severed belonging. And so when we take steps to heal that severedness and we find ways where we build community and we build belonging, we build healing. I love the idea that making a garden between this child and the neighbor is building healing. And if you look at the backstory with the neighbor, she obviously has some trauma, and building a garden with this young neighbor builds healing in her own life.
Yes, that is so beautiful, and I'm excited for more parents and leaders who support families to find this book and to see the story that you're lifting up within it. And again, it's beautiful that you bring different entry points depending on how old your child is. There's different ways they can connect to this story. At the end of the book, there is a helpful guide on ways to approach the conversation with your children when they hear about gun violence. And I'm curious if you have some insight on which of those tips have supported you in those conversations, or why you think these tips are just a great starting place, kind of giving us some more context on those tips at the back of the book.
Right. One of the great things to keep in mind is that fortunately, our children, depending on what age, so my children are 8, 7, and 2.5, but usually younger children don't carry the kind of baggage that we do with gun violence. And so, one of, I think, the most helpful things is to go where they are starting. Be curious and open to saying and asking, what are you hearing and what are you feeling? Asking, what did you hear? And what are you talking about? Or what are you and your friends having conversations about? What does that mean to you? Because what that means to them might mean something totally different than it means to us, right? So if your child does have an understanding that somebody bad had a gun and they hurt somebody, how does that make you feel? And they may not assign the same kind of meaning that we would have. And have them leading the conversation is really important. One of the tips that we have in the back of the book is talking about, why do you think somebody would have done that? Maybe they didn't have the tools to deal with their feelings. Maybe they had feelings of sadness or anger, and talking about what can we do when we have really, really big feelings of sadness and anger. And I love that Hannah included, even a hug can be a tool, right? It doesn't matter if your child is 4 or 14. Talking about emotional self-regulation, especially with our boys, is so important. Being able to talk freely about their emotions and not having our children feel embarrassed or ashamed is so important, and feeling like they have a safe place to share their feelings is really important.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thanks for lifting this up. I have found that guide at the back of the book helpful for me as I read through the story with my kids and talk about the recent school shootings we had here in Minnesota. So this was very timely. And I want to go back to your comment that we have to remember we live longer lives than our children, and we're going to feel the weight of the gun violence differently. And that's a very helpful reminder for me. I'm glad you shared that. And I'm hoping that it's helpful for our listeners as well, because I noticed that what I'm feeling is very deep grief. And
Mm-hmm.
because my children are so young, it's not affecting them in the same way. And so remembering not to impose what I feel onto my children, but to truly be this open space and hold the space with a lot of openness and compassionate curiosity to help them explore. So we're really centering our children in this conversation space. We're going to center what our children are feeling and what they're noticing rather than just tell them what to think or tell them what to feel. We're really helping them learn the practice of self reflection and journeying with them. I noticed in the book, it did say something like, when you have this conversation with your child, they might ask questions right away. They might not say anything and they might ask questions a few hours later, or they might ask questions later in the week.
Right.
Going back to that because that's how children process and it's just
Mhm.
different than how we process. These are all very helpful and practical ways for us to remember how to journey with our kids when we talk about really intense things and sad things that happen. in this case, particularly with gun violence. The other thing that I love is, and you did bring this up, we can ask the question, why do you think the person would do this? The person who had the gun, why do you think they would do this? I find it incredibly transformative that this resource, your book, invites us to not demonize the person who was the shooter, to not just label them as someone who's different or bad. Your tip in the back of the book and your resource is actually inviting us to consider what might be happening inside that person. They were probably struggling with something that was really hard. And what a beautiful invitation for us to humanize even a person that has deeply wounded our community. This is deeply spiritual, really. The question that you offer, what are the other tools you can use when something feels really hard? If you're very angry or very sad, that's actually something I was able to talk with my kids about. What are the different kinds of tools that we can use to transform violence into love, really? I think that is a very deep message for a lot of us to sit with as parents and to really reflect on how we're providing that kind of reflection with our kids. So I'm not sure if anything comes up for you as I share this reflection back.
One thing that I think about was I was in high school when Columbine happened, and that was such a seismic shift, right? And I have this very clear memory of sitting at the kitchen counter table, and my mom was tearful, and she gave me this hug, and told me how much she loved me. I don't remember feeling emotional, but in retrospect, as a parent now, I'm sure my mom felt a lot of grief and fear. But now thinking as a parent myself, how important it was, how important it is now that we don't project our own emotions and grief on our children, right? When we have those conversations. And yet, how challenging that is, right? When there are school shootings, parents, it's so important that you process this, whether it's through a therapist or through your friends or your pastors or your community members. You need to do that processing separately and not burden your children. That's
Mm.
not appropriate to do, to use your children as processing tools. Like, you need to be able to be open, like you said, with compassionate curiosity. And I think that's something to gift our children, to be open enough that we don't burden them with our own grief, because it is such a heavy laden thing to live through school shooting after school shooting. So, as parents, we need to be able to process it in a way where we can be open and available to our children.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. That is not easy work. And it wasn't like you were bringing the example of when you were younger. For many of us parents today, it wasn't really modeled to
Right.
us to have parents that would hold that open, compassionate space. This is something that feels like is becoming more a part of our conversation as parents and caregivers, learning how to process within ourselves in a safe space, and then approaching our children with so much more groundedness. And that is a very deep insight. It's very interesting to just continue to dig deeper into that and notice, what do we bring to our children and what are our children feeling when we talk with them? We're again paying attention to what's happening in our children. So that's a huge lesson for all of us to learn and to apply. The next thing I'm thinking about is this idea that we can use creativity to transform,
Yeah.
right? And the story highlights this creative process. And the words used in the story are beautiful. They really help us as readers feel what's happening. I feel it in my heart, in my body, what's happening in the story. And that speaks to the beautiful language you and Hannah used in this book. What does that mean for you to use creativity in this transformation work?
Oh, so much of my recent work, not only with the book, but also as a chaplain for older adults and in my own creative life, has been about seeing how creativity has led to so much transformation. Being able to create is so much about what God has imbued in us as holy creatures made in the image of God. I think that is so much about what makes us unique creatures. And as long as we are able to create and make new things, I think there's hope. And that just gives me so much excitement for the future because I see my children creating things that I would never think about. And Raw Tools itself was created from this really horrible tragedy. It was created as a response to Sandy Hook. Hannah was a first grade teacher and she had the exact number of students as were killed at Sandy Hook. And she was just devastated. Her husband, Mike, is executive director at Raw Tools. He learned how to become a blacksmith so he could do this. And whenever there is a high profile school shooting in the news, they continue to get interest. People will surrender their guns and say, I can't, in good conscience, keep this gun knowing that it could it could harm people. And they see this over and over again. And what I have learned that's been really amazing from them is that when they do the blacksmith, the anvil, where they transform the guns into garden tools, so much of it, yes, it is about transforming the guns into something that turns over new life, but it's also about healing for survivors of gun violence. And so they will often invite family members who have lost loved ones to gun violence to come. And it is a really palpable and powerful thing. And they've shared a number of stories with me. And, when you've lost a child or a spouse to gun violence, to be able to transform the actual weapon that led to the death of their loved one is an incredibly healing thing. There's tears streaming down their face as they do it. And I think about how symbolic that is for all the transformation that goes on deep within us, right? And I love that they turn them into garden tools because there's so much that happens underneath the soil when you plant something. It takes so much time and cultivation to grow something and to produce a fruit or a flower or a vegetable. And so I think creativity is going to continue to lead us to finding new pathways to peace and justice. And it's exciting to me.
That's beautiful. I resonate with your words and love how you connected creativity to hope. I think about how we can help co-create healing in our world, and it's connected to how we support our kids to be creative, to tap into their creative talents and creative energies and what are new possibilities that empowers them to know that they can truly bring a new thing into this world. They can truly bring change. Things don't have to stay the same. And what a beautiful invitation for us to see the promise and hope that comes with creativity and then the healing aspect. I love the connection with the gardening
Mhm.
and the healing journey, that it takes time and there's a lot of depth to that healing process. And with nurturing, attention, and care, we can produce new plants, new fruit, new vegetables, like you said. And so I trust that this book, Sparking Peace, is going to continue to be shared and spread in more and more households, and that more and more families are going to feel encouraged and empowered to know how to bring hope for such a time as this. This is the kind of resource that we really need that can really speak to us holistically in our healing process, not just as individuals, but collectively. So, thank you so much, Teresa, for sharing your heart, your wisdom, and for those of us listening, what are ways that we can support the work you do and stay connected with you?
You can, of course, buy the book,
Oh,
Spark and Peace. And I've also written a book called Mother God, which I love too. And I'm a co author for a children's book called Peace Table, which has been lovely. You can buy any of those where books are sold. I'm on Instagram and sometimes on Threads. And I have a website, which I think you'll link to. So you can follow me on those platforms. You can support me on there. And if you're in the Twin Cities area, you can come see us at First Christian Church once in a while. The best way to support is to continue building peace and justice in your own families and communities. That's what I hope this book will inspire families and households to do.
Yes, I believe very much that it will. Thank you so much for the gift you offered us with your creativity, with your words and your time. And I look forward to seeing what more things will be created through your creative gifts and talents, and just to continue to support one another, pressing in what's ahead. So thank you so much, Teresa. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Nettie.
You've been listening to Nurturing Parents, the official podcast of the Radically Inclusive Parenting Project. We hope today's conversation offered you a moment of connection, a spark of insight, or simply a reminder that you are not alone on your parenting journey. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone in your village. Together, we're building a more inclusive future, one conversation and one child at a time. For more information about the Radically Inclusive Parenting Project, visit us at inclusiveparents.org or follow us on social media at radically.inclusive.parents.